It's that time of year, award season in Hollywood, a time when the year's best in film and media are celebrated, where dreams really can come true on that glittering Academy stage. And at the best of times, a film wins an Oscar and you can just tell that everyone was rooting for it. But more often than not, the Oscars are full of just absolutely WTF moments.
Please welcome the wickedly talented one and only Adele Dazeem.
And I don't mean moments like this, because honestly, that's just entertainment to me. I also don't mean when something like this happens, where a movie celebrating women and feminism is snubbed for the Best Actress and Best Director categories, while also nominating the main male actor in a category. It's just interesting. Actually, this is just kind of insane to me. Like, that's unironically Hollywood in a nutshell. By the way, I do think Ryan deserves the nom. But again, the whole situation is just interesting. And don't think I missed y'all snubbing Celine's song and Greta Lee either. Y'all ain't slick. At least Lily Gladstone is in there. There is a God. Hi, how are you doing? My name is Suchi and welcome back to my channel, where I talk about the stories that I love and that inspire me. And today I want to talk about an aspect of the Oscars that honestly really bothers me, which is when Academy voters clearly haven't watched all of the movies that they nominated. And no Oscar category gets this treatment more often than animation. I think it's because animation is seen as a genre for kids. Every single year at the Oscars, animated movies are put under a single umbrella category, even though there are quite a few of them that no kid should ever be watching. But as we all know, well, everyone except the Academy clearly, animation is a storytelling medium that spans multiple genres. I think because animation is always assumed to be for kids, the Academy kind of sweeps this category under the rug. 9 times out of 10, they'll just give the Oscar to the Disney movie and call it a day. And Disney is an old established corporate behemoth that's become synonymous with the animation industry. But just because Disney's been around a long time doesn't mean that it always turns out incredible films that deserve all these awards. There are, in fact, other animation studios that exist out there. I know, crazy.
I thought every cartoon ever was made by Disney.
At the 2015 Academy Awards, there were 5 films nominated for Best Animated Feature. They were The Box Trolls, How to Train Your Dragon 2, The Tale of Princess Kaguya, Song of the Sea, and Big Hero 6. 3 guesses as to which one took home the Oscar that night. Yes, true to Academy tradition, Big Hero 6, the Disney film, won the award. But it shouldn't have. Now, I've seen all of these films, and honestly, all of them are pretty great and have something unique to offer. But looking back now, there's only one clear winner here. Only one of these films checks every single creative box for me, and it's not Big Hero 6. In 2014, a little Irish animation studio released a little film called Song of the Sea, and I've watched it every year since. Song of the Sea was directed by Tom Moore and tells the story of a family reeling from the loss of their mother and is steeped in rich Celtic folklore. This film is about dealing with familial loss and the bond between siblings, which incidentally is also what Big Hero 6 is about. But as much as I enjoyed Big Hero 6, it just didn't leave a lasting impact on me the way Song of the Sea did. But I admit that Baymax is very cute and extremely huggable. When I think about what I love most about animated films, there's a few things that come to mind. There's the plot itself and the characters, but then there's also the art style, the larger themes, the music, and the overall tone that, in the end, should leave you with more than what you started with at the beginning of the film. And when all of that stays with you, even long after the credits roll, that's when you know you've experienced something great. That's the mark of a film that truly deserves an Oscar. I know I haven't really talked about animation on this channel before, but animated movies were how I got into film in the first place. I mean, that's probably how most people get into film, seeing as most of the movies we watch as kids are animated, but I am one of those wackos who kept watching animated films and TV shows even into adulthood. I'm now well into my 20s, and I'm not gonna stop anytime soon. For me, Song of the Sea was one of those films. I first watched it in 2014, and it stayed with me. And even though there are a lot of other animated films that have made an impact on me and have become some of my all-time favorites, none of them have been Oscar snubbed quite so hard as this one. Except maybe How to Train Your Dragon, but that's a topic for another day. Song of the Sea was made by Cartoon Saloon, an animation studio headquartered in Kilkenny, Ireland. It's made some absolute bangers like The Secret of Kells, The Breadwinner, and Wolfwalkers, with Song of the Sea being its second feature-length animated film. One thing I love about this studio is that it focuses on traditional hand-drawn animation, something that bigger studios like Disney have kind of tossed over to the wayside in favor of computer-generated animation, which I think is unfortunate because hand-drawn is an incredibly beautiful art form and takes an insane amount of talent to pull off. And it makes Song of the Sea stand out even more to me from the other 2015 Academy nominees because they didn't even need to use CGI to create such a vivid, visually complex film. But we'll get into this later. Song of the Sea follows a 10-year-old boy named Ben who was raised by his parents in a lighthouse in a remote part of Ireland. The film opens with a flashback to the past where a younger Ben and his very pregnant mother are painting scenes from Celtic folktales on the walls. It's a scene of a blissfully happy family. As his mother tucks him into bed, she sings to him and gives him a shell, and she claims that if he holds it up to his ears, he can hear the Song of the Sea. Ben says he can't wait for the baby to come, and she tells him that he'll be the best big brother in the world. But within minutes, the flashback dissolves, with little Ben calling out to his mom, who has disappeared into the night. And the film skips forward to 6 years later, where a few things are immediately apparent. One is that Ben is no longer an only child. He now has a little sister named Saoirse, who is turning 6 that very same day. Another thing is that his mom is nowhere to be found. It's just him, his sister, his dad, and his dog named Coo. Fun fact, Coo is actually the Irish word for dog. And we get this opening scene of the kids playing on the beach, but something else is also apparent, which is that Ben isn't the nice older brother he'd said he'd be in that flashback scene. He's rather mean to his little sister. He pushes her away at every turn and just gets angry with her when she wants to play with him. I think all sibling duos are like this when we're young. I have a younger sister myself, and there were plenty of times where I just straight up didn't want to have anything to do with her, and vice versa. But we're only a few minutes into this film, and it's pretty clear that Ben is always like this to Saoirse. It's like there's this cloud of anger and resentment hanging over him every time he lays eyes on his sister. And it's obvious that this has been happening pretty much unchecked since Saoirse's birth. Their dad is the definition of emotionally unavailable father and can usually be found just staring blankly out at sea, looking like all the life has been taken out of him. He looks like he's aged like 15 years even though it's only been 6. And that's when it starts dawning on you. 6 years ago, on the night Saoirse was born, Ben's mother disappeared and never returned. Saoirse came into his life presumably at the expense of his mother's, and Ben wholly blames his little sister for it. One thing I love about this film is how it handles exposition. Obviously there has to be some for the folklore heavy aspects later on, but the big revelation that Ben's mother is gone isn't flat out told to us, but rather shown in flashbacks to the past and how the family behaves in the present. Is she dead? Did she die in childbirth? It's not quite clear, at least not yet. But at least this explains why his dad looks like he's been hit by a truck all the time. Grief can do that to you. So it's Saoirse's 6th birthday, but she hasn't learned to speak yet. She can understand other people when they talk to her, but she herself is mute. She can't quite communicate her feelings in a way that her family can understand, which alienates her a little. It's also not lost on me that Saoirse is the spitting image of her mother, while Ben looks exactly like their dad. Like the filmmakers really wanted her to be this last remaining piece of her mother that the family has left, while also kind of making her the black sheep of said family. Their granny comes up for Saoirse's birthday and is unimpressed by the state of things. She thinks her son is way too depressed to be a father, which, fair. I'm on her side. They have a cute little birthday party for Saoirse, which Ben promptly ruins, further showing us that he's still holding on to that grudge real tight and won't be letting go anytime soon. Like, this kid's vendetta against his sister runs deep. She asks him to tell her one of their mom's stories, and he tells her the story, but then he also tells her this.
And then nobody would love you.
Damn, and I thought I'd been a mean older sibling. Like, he said this on her birthday too. The story Ben tells Saoirse is about a giant that cried so many tears that he formed the whole sea around them, all because his heart had been broken by losing someone he loved. That giant was turned to stone by his mother, the Owl Witch, and what's left of him is supposedly the large island that's nearby the lighthouse. But that's just a story, right? I like that in some scenes, you can clearly see the island in the distance through the windows, like the sobbing giant from the story mirrors that specter of loss that always hangs over the lighthouse family. So naturally, Saoirse is again shunned by her brother and his frankly horrible behavior towards her, and she instead becomes enamored with the old shell that their mom had given Ben. Something within that shell calls to her, some old tune she'd heard once before, maybe in a memory, maybe in a dream. She plays that familiar tune on the shell, and something in her awakens, and suddenly there are magical lights appearing around her, leading her first to a secret chest in her parents' closet, where she finds a glittering little coat inside that fits her perfectly. Then the lights lead her to the sea, which had always beckoned to her all her life, and now she knows why. It's a part of her too. This is probably one of my favorite scenes in the entire film. Just a little girl discovering the magic in the world and within herself, and all the joy that comes along with it. She never says a word and doesn't need to. It's all over her face. The music here is so stirring and heartfelt. It truly does transport you to Saoirse's inner world and the discovery of her true heritage. And clearly there was more to their mother than met the eye, because Saoirse can turn into a magical seal when she dons that coat. Saoirse, it turns out, is a Selkie. No, not that Selkie, but a kind of fairy from Celtic folklore that shapeshifts between human and seal forms. Meanwhile, their granny apparently has a sixth sense when it comes to her grandkids, and wakes up in the middle of the night to find Saoirse washed up on the beach after her moonlit escapades as a seal. This, of course, is the last straw for our God-fearing, bird-loving, traditional Irish grandma, and she tells her son that she's taking his kids to live in the big city with her. She really said, "Weird shit is happening at this lighthouse. I am taking the kids to live a normal childhood while you get out of this depressive funk you're in." Iconic. Nobody is thrilled with this development. Ben is, of course, devastated that his life is being uprooted by his sister once again, and this time he can't even take his dog with him. And their life in the city is as one would expect when you move in with your Irish Catholic grandma. The kids are sent to bed at 4 p.m. because Saoirse flooded the bathroom trying to recreate her magic in her grandmother's ugly coat, because their dad had actually taken Saoirse's coat before they left the lighthouse and threw it into the ocean, because depression. And also fear of losing your only daughter who looks like your late wife. I should mention here that the dad is voiced by the Brendan Gleeson of Paddington fame, and I guess that other movie where he ghosted his bestie, and also father of this guy. So Granny's best coat is ruined, and the kids are put to bed bright and early in the afternoon. One thing I love about this movie is the insane level of detail in every single shot. Every time I watch it, I notice something new. Like I only just realized that the kids are made to sleep in their dad's old childhood bedroom. It says Connor, their dad's name, on the door, and inside we can see that there are posters of rock stars and pretty girls from magazines on the walls. This is such a cute little detail and something the filmmakers absolutely didn't need to put in there, but I'm glad they did, because it shows that the granny cares deeply enough for her son that she kept his childhood bedroom the way it was, rather than converting it into like a guest room or something. Ben decides this 4 p.m. bedtime life isn't for him. I can't relate, afternoon naps are amazing, and slips out the window on a quest to return to the lighthouse and to his beloved coup. Except his little sister followed him and is playing the shell that his mother gifted him, thank you very much. But something curious is happening when she plays the shell. Little magical lights appear all around her. The night that Saoirse discovered her coat and the fact that it can turn her into a magical seal, the little lights that appeared when she played the shell traveled all over Ireland and woke up a bunch of weird little guys. These are all fairies, the last remaining in this world, and they need the Selkie to sing her song so they can go back to the world where they belong. So these little guys lure Saoirse away to their hiding spot, which is a traffic circle in the middle of Dublin. Clearly, stranger danger is not a thing in 90s Ireland. Also, shout out to their keep out sign. Incredible. They may be weird little guys, but they're good little guys. The fairies try to get her to sing her song to send them home, but since she's mute and missing her magic coat, she can't exactly do that. And Ben sees all this and his world is rocked. Because it turns out that the stories his mother told him about fairies and witches and giants were never just stories. Especially the part about the witches, because at that moment, the Owl Witch's minions show up, trying to kidnap Saoirse and turn the fairies to stone. In the chaos, Saoirse plays the shell, and the music seems to reverse the effects of the Owl Witch's curse. But in the end, the fairies sacrifice themselves so that Ben and Saoirse can escape. Before they leave, the fairies tell Ben that Saoirse needs to be able to find her coat to use the full potential of her power and free the Fae folk. So the kids set off on a mission back home to retrieve it. A bus seems like the safest bet home.
I just saw real fairies.
Of course you did. Sure, haven't I been faring a load of witches and goblins around?
And if you've ever seen The Secret of Kells, Aisling the forest fairy is riding this bus too. It's Halloween, by the way. That's why there's a bunch of people in costumes everywhere. And here on this bus is where it starts to sink in for Ben, that everyone else might be dressed like otherworldly creatures, but his sister is actually one of them. Saoirse plays the shell again, and those little fairy lights appear, but they lead off into the countryside, far from the road that they're taking, and she decides that that's the way that they should go. So the siblings get kicked off the bus, and they follow the magical lights into the wilderness, though Ben has his reservations. I love when films focus on landscapes in their cinematography, and we get this lovely scene of the kids wandering through fields and forests, with all kinds of critters hanging out around and below them. And all those rocks that we see are not in fact rocks, but fairies that have been turned to stone. It seems that for centuries, fairies across Ireland ended up meeting the same fate. I feel like this is the part where you can really start to see the film's more aesthetic inspirations, particularly from another favorite animation studio of mine, Studio Ghibli. This entire film is exactly the kind of intersection of urban fantasy and romanticization of normal everyday life that Studio Ghibli excels at, where even in the most fantastical of settings, realistic character relationships are prioritized and are the heart of every story. Because the characters and the bonds that run between them are what make them feel truly alive to us. And that's what helps draw us into the film, even if the world and setting feel very different to our own. This Ghibli-esque quality is especially present in this scene, as Ku the dog shows up to lead the kids home, as they cross the countryside, and as Ben sees that his sister is not able to keep up with them. Without her coat, Saoirse is becoming weaker and weaker, and it's up to Ben to ensure her safety on the journey home. And this is the first time that he shows a shred of humanity to her, because what's happening to her is a stark reminder that she isn't fully human. That whatever is happening to her is the same thing that happened to his mother the last time he ever saw her. And so when it starts to rain and Saoirse can't find the strength to walk anymore, Ben carries her towards shelter, braving stinging nettles just so she can be safe and dry. He's defrosting towards her, and even though she has no strength left, she wanders back out in the rain to gather some leaves to soothe her brother's cuts from the nettles. It's a sweet moment, especially because Ben starts to see that she cares for him and isn't just an annoying little goober who follows him around everywhere. The fact that she treats him with kindness even though he's been such a prickly grump to her all her life, it starts to reach him. Another reason I adore this scene is the cultural implications behind it. The kids are taking shelter in a holy well, which I believe are unique to Ireland and can be found all over the country. Basically, they are places where water naturally springs out of the ground, where pagans set up little shrines to worship in ancient times, which then eventually became holy wells to honor important Christian figures. Most holy wells like this one are dedicated to the Virgin Mary. Side note, another little cultural Easter egg is that there's an old empty can of golden syrup here, which is very specific to the UK and Ireland, and is the main ingredient in treacle tart. Again, just those tiny little details adding so much character and charm to this film. Another cool thing I noticed is that the motif of mothers, specifically divine motherhood, is sprinkled everywhere in this movie. There are multiple scenes where statues or pictures of the Virgin Mary can be seen in the background, including this holy well. And you might be thinking, well, Suchi, it's Ireland. Catholicism is everywhere. And that's true, but I also think it was very intentional on the filmmaker's part to include the Virgin in so many background shots. The Virgin Mary is seen in places where humans have taken over, but in those secret places where fairies still dwell, it's Ben's mother who is featured on the walls and who is revered as divine. And it's here in this holy well that the pagan and the Christian mythologies begin to intertwine. As Saoirse plays her shell, the lights reappear and seem to be leading down into the well itself. And since she knows her brother is afraid of water, this is something she must do alone. And with one last look towards Ben, Saoirse jumps in to follow the trail and disappears into the well. Ben, of course, freaks out. He is deeply afraid of drowning, but in the end, the leash he tied onto Saoirse to keep her close pulls him in anyway. And as he sinks down into the depths, it's like he's crossing between two worlds here, leaving the modern Christianized world behind and entering a much older one, where long-forgotten beings and magic still live on. He wakes up later in a daze, in some subterranean world lit by mysterious luminescent fibers spreading out for miles and miles. His sister is nowhere to be found, but he does run into yet another weird little guy. It turns out that it's another fairy, but this time it's someone Ben recognizes from his mother's stories. He's a kind of Rapunzel dude, and each of his millions of long hairs holds a story. He tells Ben that the Owl Witch has captured Saoirse, and that her coat is the source of her magic and her connection to her mother's world, and without it, she has no voice, which explains why she's been a nonverbal child this whole time. And without her voice, she can't sing the song that'll send the fairies home, nor can she fight the Owl Witch's stoning curse. And because all of the fairies are connected to the Selkie, if she ends up being turned to stone, so will they. This is one of the few times we get exposition in this film, and it's entirely earned here because so much of the movie's runtime is spent showing rather than telling. So this backstory doesn't feel like a chore to watch. This fairy tells Ben to follow the trail of the hair that tells his sister's story, and that it'll lead him to the surface world to where the Owl Witch has her captive. I want to briefly talk about the specter of motherhood that follows Ben around everywhere. The loss of his mother and its impact on his family is the main conflict of this film, and it hangs over them constantly in the background. But there are also signs that his mother hasn't left them, that her love for them will follow them forever, because a mother's love never fades, and that itself is something divine, something like magic. This was alluded to by all of the Virgin Marys we saw before, but we can also hear her quietly humming in the background in many of the earlier scenes. By the way, she is voiced by Lisa Hannigan, Blue Diamond in Steven Universe, iconic. And in this scene, her voice grows louder and louder as Ben follows the strand of hair out of the caves, until her song is bursting into the foreground, and the memory within the hair shows him what he's been missing all this time. We, along with Ben, are treated to a flashback of what really happened the night his mother disappeared. That upon sensing she would die in childbirth, his mother rushed to the sea to ensure that at least her baby would survive. And before her husband could reach her, the sea had already claimed her, leaving the family only with a tiny bundle on the shore, wrapped in a glittering sealskin coat. His mother, who was a Selkie, had gone back to a place her family couldn't follow, and she'd left behind a little girl who looked just like her, who was the last remaining Selkie in the world. Ben sees all this and remembers the promise he'd made the last time he ever saw his mother, that he'd always take care of his little sister. This is such an emotionally charged scene, and I always get a little misty-eyed watching it, because this is the moment where Ben steps into his role as the protective older brother he promised he'd be when his sister needs him the most. The trail ends here, at the edge of a lake, where a stormy island in the middle marks the Owl Witch's house. Ben bursts inside, and it's giving granny vibes, right down to the music playing on the radio. And instead of a parakeet in a cage, there are a bunch of owls everywhere. And again, this is intentional on the filmmaker's part. Fanula Flanagan, who voices the grandma, also voices the Owl Witch, because they are essentially the same character. The witch tells Ben that the giant from that story had been her son, and she had turned him to stone so that he would stop feeling those pesky feelings. She couldn't bear to see him suffer, so she tried to help him the only way she knew how. And now that he's basically a rock, he feels nothing. Because emotions are for the weak. It's much better to bottle them up forever. Conceal, don't feel is the way to go, which incidentally is also what Ben's granny tried to do for her son and his family. Instead of addressing their feelings of loss and grief, she insisted that ignoring them would make things better.
You're better off not thinking about that night, you know.
But, as Ben now realizes,
No, it doesn't help at all. It just makes things worse.
the Owl Witch takes the concept of bottling up your feelings a tad too literally here, because her house is full of jars containing stormy, messy emotions from all the fairies she'd turned to stone over the years, including herself.
You're half turned to stone.
Man, these ladies need therapy. And also the dad. And probably Ben too. You get therapy. You get therapy. Everyone gets therapy. I like the Owl Witch's design, by the way. Very reminiscent of Yubaba or Zaniba from Spirited Away, especially given her stature and the fact that her eyes are the size of dinner plates. Ben finds Saoirse in the attic, and she's almost entirely been turned to stone. He's almost too late. Her only hope to free herself is to play the shell. But she's been through so much in her short life. She has nothing left. She is so tired of it all. But her brother has her back now, in a way he never had before. He helps her remember the tune, and he tells her the one thing she really needs to hear in that moment.
It's not your fault. It never was. I should have been a better brother to you.
This gives Saoirse the strength to play her shell, which breaks the jars containing all those emotions, and the witch's curse is broken. But this also uses up everything she has left, and she collapses with precious little time left to get to her coat. The Owl Witch finally has access to all of her emotions now, which makes her realize how wrong she'd been to bottle the feelings away, that she regrets what she's done to her son and to all the other fairies that she turned to stone. She offers to help Ben get Saoirse to her coat, and conjures up the wind to carry the kids and Ku home as fast as possible. This is such a great scene. The air dog spirits are so cute, and I love the shots we get of them crossing the countryside and taking random passersby completely by surprise. It's a nice little way of showing us that these magical creatures can, in fact, be perceived by humans, but if you blink twice, they'll be gone with the wind. They reach the lighthouse, and Ben bursts into his dad's room, looking for Saoirse's coat. Dad, of course, is still a depressed girly and is sitting by himself in the dark. He's just like me, for real. He's utterly befuddled as to why his son is home instead of in the city, but when he sees the state Saoirse is in, he immediately piles them into a boat and starts rowing. But not to get to her coat, which is at the bottom of the ocean, to get her to a hospital. because at this point he still hasn't accepted the fact that his daughter, like her mother, is not human. But luckily Ben has, and the magical lights appear once again below the water's surface. This time he doesn't even question it. He dives in. His love for his sister is stronger than his fear of water. Saoirse's seal friends lead Ben to the chest with her coat inside, and Dad hauls him back to the surface just in time. And once Saoirse is reunited with her coat, she opens her eyes and speaks for the very first time. It's a really poignant moment for everyone because for the first time, Saoirse is seen by her dad for who she is. The dog spirits push them all into the water, and Saoirse turns into her true Selkie form in front of her family. And though she is not like them, it doesn't matter. She belongs with them, and they belong with her. They can learn to be happy now. A wave drops them off onto the shores of an island, the very one that was said to be a giant turned to stone. And although the family is together again, something still needs to be done for Saoirse to truly recover. She must find her voice and sing. But doing something you've never done is always daunting. That's why it's nice to have someone in your corner and hold your hand while you give it a try. Which is who Ben is to her now. After years of making her feel unwanted, Ben is going to spend the rest of their lives making sure Saoirse never feels alone again. Now that's what I like to call character growth. And after a little encouragement from her brother, Saoirse begins to sing, and something happens. Her voice reverberates through the air, and a whole aurora of colors bursts open in the sky above. And true to the folklore, Saoirse's voice is what frees the fairies from their stony prisons. All over Ireland, fairies wake up as though they've been sleeping for centuries, and the Aurora Borealis leads them home. Every fairy character the siblings have come across, the weird little guys, the old Rapunzel man, even the crying giant from the stories, all wake up. They're freed from the coils of this modern world, ready to return to the land of Tir na Nog, where all fairies come from, and where you can get a pint with the boys on a Friday evening, apparently. I truly believe this film deserves the Oscar just for this scene alone. The vibrant colors, the music, Saoirse's voice, everything here comes together to create something incredibly magical and stirring. And if the Academy voters had watched this film, I just know that this is the part that would have struck Oscar gold. As the fairies cross into the next world, someone else appears. Someone who's been gone for 6 long years, until now, when she's come to say goodbye. This is the part where I usually start crying because for a moment there, it looks like their mother doesn't even remember the family she left behind. All she knows is her Selkie daughter, and her husband and son have accepted the fact that she can't stay in this world. Her time is up. But while they understand that she doesn't really belong in this world, they know that's not the case for Saoirse. She belongs with Ben and her dad, and they will always love and remember her mother. And that's what makes Mom remember who they are. She gives Saoirse the choice to leave with her or stay in this world, and Saoirse chooses to stay. Her mother takes her Selkie coat, and Saoirse is made human. She can be with Ben and her dad now. This farewell scene is a lesson on how to make a film emotionally resonant. It has everything. The facial expressions, the voice acting, the tender music, the insane color palette. It's just a stunning scene, period. All the flowers to Cartoon Saloon. Their mother says her last goodbye to her family, reminding them that she loved them back then and always will. And with one last glance, she leaves this world, leaving behind a small but fiercely loving family that is broken no longer.
Just I've been asleep all these years. I'm so sorry.
Dawn breaks, and the granny, having realized that the kids escaped the city, is rushing back to the lighthouse to ask if they're okay. And they are now. They're more than okay, because they have each other, and that was all they ever really needed. And the film ends there, with Ben and Saoirse being, well, siblings. They still junk each other into cake, but it's all love now, and they lived happily ever after in the end. And that's it. That is why Song of the Sea deserved the Oscar. To see an animated film as visually captivating and emotionally stirring as this one is pretty rare these days. Even more so when they're hand-drawn. And in a sea of CGI films, that makes this one all the more special. Song of the Sea is a film that truly had the sauce. And if the Academy had actually watched it, they'd know that too. I hope animation studios like Cartoon Saloon endure forever because the stories they tell are one of a kind and honestly unforgettable in the best way. If you guys have seen Song of the Sea, let me know your thoughts on the film down below. And if you haven't, I hope I've convinced you guys to give it a watch because I promise it is worth your time. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see y'all in my next video. Bye!